Hello everyone. So once you have understood the different types of production systems and the what the processes are, one of the things that we have discussed is about the metrics that are important from the processes point of view. One of the metrics that we had looked at is this concept called as lead time. Now, the lead time in processes is something that gets represented in a slightly different format, but it is important for us to know what are the different process measures, what are the different process um, metrics, and also in terms of some of the terminology that is important from a processes point of view. So let's get to understand a little bit about the different kinds of metrics and terminology that is important from a process point of view. To start with, the first thing that we need to understand is something called as a flow unit. Now, a flow unit is any particular unit that is flowing through the what we call as the process boundaries. So any particular unit which is flowing through the process boundaries is what we would refer to as a flow unit. A flow unit could be an order, an item, a product or a service, a work in progress inventory, or any particular type of request that is flowing through the process boundaries. If we take an example of you visiting a hospital, then it would be you who become the flow unit because you are moving around the hospital to meet to meet the doctor, to meet the receptionist, to make the payment. So you're moving along that particular process boundaries, so you become the flow unit. If there is a file that is something that you have submitted, let's say to get a passport, your file, which is going from right from the start of the verification till you eventually get your passport, your file with a particular number becomes a flow unit in that particular process. And if it is a manufacturing setup, if let's say there is a uh, particular component which is used to make an automobile, then something like like a wheel is something that is moving around till it gets eventually adjusted to that particular car is going to be the flow unit. So any item, product, or service which is within the process boundaries is what we refer to as a flow unit. A flow unit is important for us to understand because the entire process measures are based on this particular flow unit. Now, sometimes the flow unit could be one particular single unit. Sometimes it could be a batch of things as well. Now, especially when you are making uh, things like donuts or things like candies, you're not going to make one at a time in a manufacturing setup. You're going to do that in a batch. The same way, imagine you are going to do a particular tour in a museum, and there is a tour guide who is given to you. Now usually the tour guide is not going to do this entirely only for one single person. They're going to do it for a batch of people, right? So you become, as a batch of people, you become the flow unit. Now, it is important for us to understand and differentiate between the flow units, whether it is a single person or a batch, because that indicates how much you can do with that particular process or that inputs. Right? This is what a flow unit is. Then comes the element which we had referred to as our flow time or our lead time. This is what we call as the flow time or throughput time. A flow time or a throughput time is nothing but the time the flow unit takes to between entering that particular process boundary and leaving that process boundary. That is what we refer to as our flow time or throughput time. So flow time or throughput time is nothing but the time it takes for a flow unit to move from beginning to the end of the process. Please understand that this is measured in time units, whether it is in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, whatever it might be. So the flow time is the entire duration of the time it takes for the flow unit to move from here all the way up till here. Now, please understand in this particular flow time, there might be multiple activities which we had looked at in the process analysis video, that these are represented by different rectangles, and the Flow unit might be spending time in different activities, but it might also spend time in the form of a triangle where it is waiting. Now that means that every single minute or second that the flow unit is spending within the process boundaries, whether it is within that particular activity or whether it is waiting, will be classified as an element of the flow time. So flow time includes both what we call as value added activities, right? Time spent in value added activities, as well as time spent in non value added activities. That is what we can see over here. This is the second process measure. The next process measure is what we call as the flow rate or throughput. Flow rate or throughput is nothing but the rate at which the flow units are flowing out of your process boundaries in a given amount of time. So flow rate is not the number of units that are flowing through the process boundaries, but it is the total number of units that are coming out of your overall process boundaries within a given amount of time. Now, if you have to measure the output or the flow rate of any particular bank or any ATM, if that is what we want to look at, then we can see how many of them are coming out of that particular bank or ATM in a span of, let's say, 1 hour. So if there are 10 people who are coming out, we don't care how many people are going in, because the flow rate is about the rate at which people are coming out. That is, that defines what throughput is. So throughput is a word which is very commonly used in general parlance, and this particular measure is a representation of how much you can do. So for any particular process as well, the number of outputs that you can create in a given time is going to be flow rate. Now, it is easy for us to understand that the units corresponding to flow rate are going to be the total number of processed units for a given time. Now, imagine if it is a bank, then it is going to be total number of persons coming out per, let's say, an hour, per a day, per, let's say, a minute. So, depending upon what is the time that we are interested to look in. So flow rate or throughput is definitely going to be the total number of flow units coming out of the process boundaries, not what is going in, right? So it is important for us to note that particular thing. Then we talk about something called as inventory. Now inventory, when we talked about processes, we said that this is related to the triangles which are there in our in the processes. Now, inventory, when we talk about process measures, is also measured in a slightly different manner. Now, if you look at the definition of inventory we say is something that is currently being worked upon but can be put to use in a different format in the future. That is what an inventory is. Now, if that is the definition of inventory, then anything which is there within the process boundary, whether it is as part of a particular activity or whether it is part of the waiting, is definitely going to be counted as an inventory. So inventory is the total number of units which are present within the process boundaries at any point in time. So if you're saying that at 12 o'clock, if you go to a particular hospital, or probably go to a manufacturing location, or let's say we go to a bank and look at count the total number of people who are there, the customers, at any point in time, that becomes what we call as an inventory. Inventory is, as I define, any flow unit which is currently being worked upon but can be put to future use. That means that if you are not completing your complete process, that means that there is some use or something left for it to be done, and hence that is referred to as an inventory. So inventory is the total number of flow units in a process at any point in time. Now, please understand the difference between inventory and flow rate. Flow rate is only about the units that are coming out of the system, while inventory is the total number of units within the system. Right? This is what process. This is how you differentiate between inventory and flow rate. Now, there are some more process vocabulary that we need to understand. Now, one of the things that is important for us to understand the flow time, lead time concepts is also something called as the processing time. And processing time is something that you're all very familiar with. You've been using this to solve a lot of aptitude problems, right, from your CAT and other things, or any aptitude test that you would have taken. So processing time is nothing but the time any particular activity, worker, machine is taking to complete one particular activity. So recollect our definition of this particular rectangle, which is representing an activity. If a particular if a particular flow unit takes about 2 minutes to complete this particular activity, then we call that as the processing time of that particular activity. If you would have gone through the Kristen's Cookie Company case, you would understand that the processing time for the oven, which is baking that particular product, was considered to be 10 minutes, right? So processing time is nothing but the time the worker, the machine, the request, that activity